What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another retro Yu-Gi-Oh format video. And in this video, we're going to be continuing our exploration of PSV format, diving into what I think is probably the only other contender for top deck in the format, which is Empty Jar. Now, I showed off in my last video how Machine OTK is a really dominant force in this format. It's extremely explosive, is able to just shut down your opponent very easily. And this deck is sort of the opposite. This deck does take some setup, but when it does manage to go through, it can just be incredibly brutal for your opponent to deal with and can potentially just win you the game very easily. However, this deck does have some major flaws, which we'll also dive into in this deck breakdown here. But before diving into the deck breakdown, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe. We're at just over 450 subscribers, which I'm really happy about, and I'd love to reach 500 by the end of the month. So if you're not already subscribed, please do so. In addition, we are also going to be going into the next format, Imperial Format, very soon. So it should be a bit more balanced of a format and more fun of a format than this one is. So if you're interested in that, definitely subscribe so that way you'll be kept up to date when those videos come out. And also join the YGO from Zero Discord to explore these formats for yourself, play games against awesome duelists who are also just trying to figure out what the best decks and cards are in these formats. Lastly, if you enjoy the video, as always, please do leave a like down below. Now, Empty Jar is a deck that's a little bit controversial, I think. A lot of people view it as very degenerate, and to be fair, it is. But I've always had a soft spot for this sort of deck, especially because I think that it is a very interesting sort of deck, as there aren't many combo decks really at this time in the game's history. You know, most of the aggressive decks are based more on just resource management and getting the most out of your monsters, which is very fun and is oftentimes what people come to these old formats for. But I do think it's really cool just being able to see a deck that can do something a bit different and pop off in a bit of a different way. And that's what Empty Jar aims to do. So the goal of this deck is to basically deck out your opponent using powerful flip monsters. The most powerful of these flip monsters, in my opinion actually, for the deck is Morphin Jar number 2, which is actually a new inclusion from Pharaoh's Servant. It shuffles all monsters on the field into the deck when it's flipped up, then each player activates cards from the top of their deck until they activate the same number of monsters that they shuffled into their deck. Then they special summon all level 4 or lower monsters in face down defense position and send the remaining cards to the graveyard. Now, this is really good at stemming aggressive pressure. Before this, the deck's main way to do this in a monster was Cyber Jar, which was limited to 1 copy, and you could recycle it with something like a Spear Cretin, but there was always the risk that off of a Cyber Jar, your opponent would be able to get a field full of monsters and you would draw none, which would mean that you'd be taking a ton of damage. Morphing Jar number 2 sort of cuts that off by setting any monster that it summons out. And also, instead of your opponent gaining powerful spells and traps that they might get off the Cyber Jar, Morphing Jar number 2 just sends them to the graveyard, which makes this card extremely powerful, and probably the best card in the deck in my opinion. However, while it may be the best new inclusion to the deck, the old cards are still good too. Morphing Jar lets you discard your opponent's hand and then they draw 5 new ones, which can replenish your hand as well as you do this as well, but also is great just getting your opponent 5 cards deeper into the deck. Hero's Shadow Scout is a bit underwhelming. It does effectively mill 3 cards though, and also it has the upside that your opponent won't be getting powerful spells to hand, and spells can be pretty rough for this deck, especially after siding. Magician of Faith is in here just as a way to sort of recycle card destruction. Now, we've only got the 1 as the deck is kind of tight on space, and I think this is sort of the card that does the least for this strategy. As, you know, with Imperial Order in the format at 3 copies, the spells can be easily shut off. So that's why this card's in here at 1. It's still very good to have at recycling that card destruction if you need it. But, you know, I don't really think it's as good as it was in the previous formats in this deck. We've also got 3 Man-Eater Bug to sort of act as a defensive tool to pop your opponent's monsters that may be getting for damage. We've got the Cyber Jar that I mentioned earlier. Still a very good card. It's just, I think the Morphing Jar number 2 is just a little bit better. We've got 2 Sangan, 2 Witch of the Black Forest to search out pretty much any monster in our deck. And we've got these Spear Cretins, which is great at being able to cycle the various flip monsters that enable us to get our game plan going. For the spells, we've got 2 card destruction. This can be great, especially off of something like a Cyber Jar, at just killing your opponent out of nowhere. So it's very good, and if you draw both, then this can just lead to very explosive plays that kill your opponent out of nowhere. We've also got some limited spells. We've got Change of Heart, Dark Hole, Pot of Greed, Raigeki, and the Forceful Sentry. There are a lot more other powerful limited spells in this format, but I figured that these are the ones that do the most for this deck. You'll notice that Painful Choice is in the side here now, but my feeling was like you could bring this in against Machine OTK if you knew that that was what your opponent's on, but given that sort of this mill deck is much more prevalent in this format, given that the top two decks, in my opinion, are Machine OTK and Empty Jar, you don't want to have this in the main, as against the Empty Jar matchup, it can be pretty bad. But maybe this was a mistake. Maybe we should just keep this in the main deck anyways, swapping it out for something like the Forceful Sentry. I think that all these limited spells are extremely good at furthering your game plan here. Maybe Change of Heart is cuttable, but I think it's very good against the Empty Jar mirror match. We've also got 3 Giant Trunade to bounce back your opponent's cards, so that way they've got bigger hands for card destruction and also to bait out a potential Imperial Order. We've got 2 Swords of Revealing Light to stall. This is a lot worse with Imperial Order in the format, and also all the spell and trap removal that a lot of decks are running to deal with Imperial Order. But I do still think it's okay here. It's a good stall tool that you can recycle with Giant Trunade, so it's got that going for it. We've got 3 Imperial Order, as this is largely our only out to Nobleman of Crossout, which is an incredibly powerful anti-Empty Jar tool that we really need to stop in its tracks. We've got a Mirror Force to stem aggressive pressure. We've got 3 Waboku to protect our life points and our monsters. And moving on to the side deck, we've got 3 Karibo for in case we go up against Machine OTK. We've got the Painful Choice, as I mentioned before. Again, this can be good to bring in against Machine OTK if you know they're not on Empty Jar. We've got a Confiscation to bring in if we're going first. It can be good to have that targeted hand knowledge to prevent our opponent from being able to stop our many plays. We've got a Magician of Faith here in case we want to get a bit more recursion in the deck. We've got 3 Dust Tornadoes to deal with Imperial Orders and the like. We've got 3 Magic Jammers to deal with Nobleman's Crossout. We've got 3 Solemn Judgment in case we really need them, and that's the deck. I think that an aspect of this deck that you can't quite see in the deck breakdown here is that there is so much anti-Empty Jar hate in the format. So things like Nobleman of Crossout, Ceasefire, Light of Intervention, all of those are incredibly brutal to deal with as this deck. So it can be very good to side in things like Solemns and Magic Jammers for if you expect that your opponent's going to bring those in, as those can be some of the only interaction points that this deck has to actually stop those things from going through. But that's going to do it for the deck breakdown. Let's dive into some games to see exactly how this deck operates and whether it's actually decent enough to be considered one of the top decks of the format. Okay, we've got a game against Aratos here, a frequent guest on the channel. Always a pleasure to have them on. We are on Empty Jar. Unclear exactly what they're on, but we'll find out. They do win the Rock, Paper, Scissors, so they will be able to go first here. And let's see how this goes. This is a pretty decent opener. This would have been a lot better going first, as we would have been able to Forceful Sentry, know what they got first thing. They've got a Pot of Greed as well. Hopefully they don't have too much hand removal, and it looks like they don't, so we're feeling pretty good about that. We are going to just fire the Forceful Sentry to see what they've got, and also if they do have an Imperial Order set, we want the Forceful negated over the Pot of Greed, as Pot of Greed's a little bit more powerful. Unfortunately, they do have the Imperial Order here, so that will get negated. We're just going to set this Man-Eater Bug, set a Swords of Revealing Light, as it's not really doing anything right now. Pass back to them. They will pay 700 to keep the Imperial Order on field here. They're going to bring out a Mechanical Chaser, flip up a Witch of the Black Forest, and they're going to set a bunch just in case it's a Morphing Jar, and attack into our set. It's a Man-Eater, so we'll pop that Mechanical Chaser. They will get an 1100 here, but I thought it was more valuable to pop the Mechanical Chaser rather than pop the Witch and let them get a search off that. So we are going to take 1100 from that. They'll pass back to us. We draw another Hero's Shadow Scout, which could be good for later. But we're just going to set the Witch right now, because if they don't have another beater in hand, they can't actually get over this. So they will pay another 7 to keep the Imperial Order on field. They're going to bring out a Sandgate and try and get aggressive here. Unfortunately for them, it is a Witch, so they won't actually be able to do that. We draw a Sandgate of our own, so we're just going to set that to potentially get a good search here. They are going to pay another 700 to keep the Imperial Order on field, and they're going to tribute that Sandgate for a Jinzo. That's a bit worrying, but they can't actually get through our defensive line here, so we're feeling good about that. And also we will have a Pot of Greed to draw some. They're going to attack into our monsters. We're going to search out a Morphing Jar number 2 with the Witch, as that can deal with Jinzo. And they're going to attack over a Sangam with their Witch, so we're going to grab a Cyber Jar. They're going to pass back to us, and since that Imperial Order is down, we can actually fire this Pot of Greed and actually reasonably pull it off. So we'll be able to draw 2. We're going to activate swords. We're going to set a Morphing Jar number 2 and pass back to them. The swords are just there in case they have something like a Raigeki, which can get over our set. We don't want to be taking 3,500 damage. Now, of course, they could have like Dust Tornado or Mystical Space Typhoon as well, but at least this way it gets them to use up additional cards. They are going to Mystical Space Typhoon the swords there. Set 1 and attack into our set. Luckily for us, it is a Morphing Jar number 2. Since Morphing Jar number 2 is destroyed by that battle, it won't actually count as being on the field for its own effect. So only our opponent will have to shuffle back and send to grave. So they've got 2 monsters that they shuffled back, so they're going to go until they hit 2 monsters from their deck that can actually be summoned. And they're going to hit a Morphing Jar of their own and a Mechanical Chaser. So they will be able to set both of those, which isn't the worst for us. We've got some very powerful monsters in hand, to be fair. But, you know, I'm still feeling good about this. They're going to set another of their own and pass back to us. We're very happy about this because now all Mystical Space Typhoons are gone. So that is very nice for us. They also sent a Trunade, which is very good. And just another form of aggressive pressure that we can stop. And a Confiscation, so that way one less card that they'll be able to snipe out of our hand. We are going to draw Wuboku, which is pretty good. We're going to set this Morphing Jar number 2 and set a Wuboku and pass back to them. If they do flip up the Morphing Jar, that's of course unfortunate. We're losing some powerful monsters in hand here. But that will also dig them 5 deeper into their deck, and they will still be getting a fair amount of mills off of this Morphing Jar number 2 if it actually sticks the landing here. So they're going to pay 7 for the Imperial Order. Flip up this Mechanical Chaser, flip up a Witch of the Black Forest, and will they flip up the Morphing Jar? They are not. And I think that's smart. You know, you don't want to play into the mill strategy. So they're going to attack into our set. It is just a Morphing Jar number 2, so that will shuffle back all 3 of their monsters, and they'll mill until they hit 3. So they hit a Mechanical Chaser, a Cyber Jar, and a Witch of the Black Forest. So all of those will indeed be set, but they also hit some very powerful ones. They hit a Premature Burial, a Dark Hole, Limiter Removal, good to see that gone, and some more Spawn Trap Removal. So we're feeling very good about this. All those will be set. And so that Cyber Jar will potentially be able to be activated and destroy our field, which is a bit unfortunate, but it will also be wiping out whatever they've got on field as well. We're going to think about exactly what to do here, and we're going to set the Cyber Jar of our own. If they flip up their Cyber Jar, we will lose ours, which is unfortunate. But honestly, we're okay as long as one Cyber Jar gets activated. So we're going to do that. Pass back to them. They're going to pay another 700 for the Imperial Order. Flip up a Witch of the Black Forest. Flip up a Mechanical Chaser here. And they're going to set 1 and attack in. And it is the Cyber Jar, so we'll be able to pop their entire field there. They will get a search off the Witch, unfortunately, but this does really stem their aggressive pressure. Unfortunately, we hit no monsters, so if they get a big field of them, then we won't have any choice but to Wuboku. But they don't really hit many good ones. They hit a Jinzo, which they can tribute out later, potentially. But honestly, we're fine with Morphing Jar and Guardian. Like, that is pretty good for us. Especially given that Imperial Order is up, so they won't be able to use Limiter Removal on Guardian in the Throne Room. They're going to bring up both of those in attack, which I think makes sense. Add the remainder to hand. And we will add ours as well. So we've got another Wuboku, so we could feel fine just firing our first Wuboku here. It also clears up a back row as well. So they're going to try attacking in here, and we are just going to take it, I guess, because we want to save our Wubokus for when we really need them. They're going to pass back to us. We draw Spear Cretin, which is incredibly good. That will enable us to get back Morphing Jar number 2. So we'll set that, set another Wuboku, set the Imperial Order here, and set a card destruction, because that does bring us down to 6 cards in hand. In their standby phase, because we do know that they have Jinzo, we're actually going to fire a Wuboku now. So that way we dodge around if they do potentially bring out a Jinzo and go for a major aggressive push here. They're going to pay 7 for the Imperial Order, and they're just going to get attacking into our set. It's Spear Cretin, so we're going to grab back a Cyber Jar here, because we do have the card destruction in hand. So we figure that, you know, if they do stop paying for Imperial Order, this will enable us to potentially just kill them. So we're going to get back the Cyber Jar, but we do realize that we made a little bit of a mistake there. Spear Cretin is not destroyed by battle since it is under Wuboku. So we messed up there a little bit, but doesn't really matter. They know we've got a Spear Cretin. and they could pretty easily figure out what we'd get back with it. So not the worst thing in the world. We draw Mirror Force, which is pretty good. We're going to think for a bit because we do know that they've still got the Jinzo, but now the Spear Cretin is flipped face up. This is a lot better for us, as, you know, even if they Raigeki or something, then we can still get a monster back from our graveyard. Now, the issue is we do know that they've got a Snatch deal, so, you know, they could potentially take our Spear Cretin and get in that way. So we've got to sort of think about that. And we actually come across the question, you know, can we actually activate Swords of Revealing Light when Imperial Order is on field, and what will actually happen if we do? So we spent some time researching that, and then after researching it, we find out that, you know, we can activate swords, and if we do, it stays on field. It won't actually do anything, but it will stay on field like it normally does. So we're going to activate swords here, set a Morphing Jar, set a Mirror Force, pass back to them. Now if they bring out Jinzo, swords will go online, and they won't actually be able to attack. So we feel pretty good about that. They're just going to pay the 7 for the Imperial Order, set another pass back to us. We draw a Man-Eater Bug, which is pretty good. We're going to set a Hero Shadow Scout, pass back to them. They are going to just pass back to us. I guess they forgot to pay for Imperial Order there, but it doesn't really matter as we're not going for damage anyways. We draw a Giant Tornado, which is pretty good. Oh, they remembered to pay it there. We're going to flip up this Hero Shadow Scout here, as this will potentially just be the end of the game if all this goes through. They're going to add the Jinzo off that. We're going to flip up a Morphing Jar, as they've only got 5 cards left in deck. So that will just be the end of the game. So I think that showed how powerful the deck can be when your opponent isn't prepared for it. You know, there is a lot of empty jar heat in the format, like Nobleman of Crossout, Ceasefire, Light of Intervention, but oftentimes your opponent won't have those in the main deck during game 1. And if the deck is allowed to do what it does, it can just be incredibly devastating to deal with. So we were able to get away with all that in game 1. Let's see if we'll be able to in game 2. A bit less likely, given that they're probably going to have a lot more empty jar hate in the main deck now. So we are going to go second, as we did win the last game. And this is an extremely good hand if we're able to pull it off. They're just going to T-set and pass back to us. And we are actually going to set a Witch of the Black Forest instead of setting something like a Morphing Jar number 2 or a Cyber Jar. And you might wonder why that is, given that these two are so powerful. And the reason for that is, if they have like a Nobleman of Crossout, then we are in a pretty tough situation if they actually do Nobleman of Crossout like a Morphing Jar number 2, as we're cut off from using that card for the entire rest of the game. They're going to set a bunch and attack in, so it looks like they don't actually have a Nobleman, so maybe we should have actually set the Morphing Jar number 2. But it's fine. It's better safe than sorry. We're going to take 1,000. They do have a Confiscation, so they will be able to snipe one of those Morphing Jar number 2s from our hand, and they'll pass back to us. We're going to set another Morphing Jar number 2. Given that they didn't have Nobleman last turn, they likely don't this turn as well. If they do snipe it with a Nobleman, then we do lose access to the Morphing Jar on field and the one remaining in deck. But if we get a Spear Cretin, then we can revive the one in graveyard, so it's not the worst thing in the world. They got Pot of Greed, though, which is pretty brutal for us potentially if they draw a Nobleman. They've got Raigeki, which is honestly pretty similar. They're going to tribute over their Sangan for a Jinzo, and they're going to attack in for 40-50 damage. If they've got a limited removal here, they just win the game, and it looks like they don't, so that's pretty good for us. We draw. We're going to set the Cyber Jar, set a Woboku. Woboku isn't really useful right now, but we are just going to fire a card destruction just in case we get something that we can use off of this. And also, we don't want them to have access to the Cannon Soldier, as that could just kill us out of nowhere. So, maybe a bit risky in case they, like, draw into a Nobleman. But they've got a Trunade, so that will basically prevent us from being able to use any of our back row here. Not like we would have been able to anyways, given that Jinzo was on field, but still. They're going to Nobleman, and that will just be the end of the game. So maybe a bit of a mistake to use the card destruction that could have drawn them into the Nobleman, but I was afraid of the Cannon Soldier, so I think that makes some sense. I don't think that we were going to win that game anyways, given that we were pretty low on resources there, and they would have drawn into the Nobleman off of the Cyber Jar anyways if it went off, so I feel like we were probably not going to win that game either way. But I think that does show how difficult the deck can be to play in games 2 and 3. You've got to be very careful, and sometimes you can be too careful, and oftentimes that can be enough for your opponent to win. So We are going to go into game 3 here. Luckily, we will be able to go first here. But, you know, we're still dealing with all of our opponent's anti-empty jar hate. So it's a bit worrying. We can Pot of Greed here, though, which is pretty nice. We're just going to set a Cyber Jar first turn. Set a Dust Tornado, set another Dust Tornado, and pass back to them. The reason we're setting Cyber Jar first turn is we figure, you know, they've got to have the Nobleman of the Opener if they want to deal with this. And even if they do, they're only sniping the Cyber Jar. It's not like Morphing Jar number 2, where if you hit it with a Nobleman, then you lose out on multiple cards as well. There's only one Cyber Jar in the game, so we want to get it on field as soon as possible. And also, we want to get it in Graveyard as soon as possible for Spear Cretin. So that's our reasoning here. It does come back to bite us because they do have a Nobleman of Crossout here. Very unfortunate, so we will lose our Cyber Jar. They're going to set one. We're just going to fire a Dust Tornado in the end phase. And it is a Giant Trunade, so not really much to speak of there. We're going to bring out a Witch of the Black Forest and actually attack in directly. So, you know, it seems like they don't have any monsters, so we're fine doing this. We'll set the Trunade as a bluff, pass back to them. They're going to pass back to us, and we feel very good about this. We're just going to attack in with our Witch here. And main 2, we're just going to set a Magician of Faith. If they do Nobleman this, that's kind of unfortunate. But if they don't, we can get back Pot of Greed, which is very nice. They're going to Dark Hole, so, you know, we will lose our Magician, but we will be able to get a search off this Witch. And we're just going to grab another Witch. Seems like they don't really have any monsters. And we could potentially win through damage. That's always an option. We're going to bring out the Witch, just keep attacking in. And so they'll take an additional 1100, pass back to them. And it looks like they've got a Change of Heart, which is a bit worrying because if they've got a Jinzo like that, then they contribute off our Witch. We'll add a Karibo to hand just in case. And they're going to attack in with the Jinzo here. We'll take 2400. They're going to set one, pass back to us. Maybe we should have gotten like a Sangan or something in retrospect, given that we do have the Raigeki to deal with the Jinzo. So we are going to fire that Raigeki to clear the Jinzo. We're going to set this Morphing Jar number 2, set an Imperial Order, and pass back to them. You know, if they've got, like, Nobleman, we can chain Imperial Order. So they'd have to have, like, a Mystical Space Typhoon or something to actually stop that. So I'm feeling okay about setting this. Maybe it's a bit greedy, but they're just going to fire an Imperial Order here instead. So we're going to fire off a Dust Tornado to clear that. They're going to fire another Premature Burial. And we actually feel fine here about chaining Imperial Order. As, you know, this way we'll be able to stop them from doing this. If they've got a Mystical Space Typhoon, then they could fire it here. But if they've got a Mystical Space Typhoon, we still feel fine because it's very unlikely that the last card in hand will be a Nobleman. So they're going to chain the Mystical Space Typhoon. Quite unfortunate. So the only way this really loses us the game here, though, is if that last card in hand is a Nobleman of Crossout, which is a little bit unlikely. Unfortunately, it is, so they will be able to get rid of that Morphing Jar. So we will lose the additional copies in our deck. There's one more copy that we need to get rid of there. And they're going to attack in for 2400. This is really worrying as we've lost our Cyber Jar and all of our Morphing Jars. So we don't really have a good way to deal with Jinzo here. Spear Cretin's okay, can stall for a bit, but, you know, it's still kind of bad. They're going to attack in with the Jinzo. We'll be able to get back a Magician of Faith to potentially get back that Raigeki that we used up earlier. And they're just going to pass back to us. We draw a Morphing Jar, which is pretty good. We're going to flip up that Magician of Faith, and we're actually going to get back a Pot of Greed. I think the Raigeki probably would have been a little bit better here. But I guess we're just trying to hope to draw into things that can mill them a bit more. But I don't know, Raigeki is probably best. We're going to set another Spear Cretin. They're going to attack in to our Magician. We're going to discard a Karibo here. And they're going to fire a Confiscation, dropping down 1,000 more. We will lose our Sangan here, and they'll pass back to us. We draw Man-Eater Bug, which does deal with the Jinzo. So maybe the Pot of Greed was the right play after all. They're going to attack into our set here. It is Man-Eater, so we'll be able to pop that Jinzo there. They're going to fire off a Call of the Haunted to get back the Jinzo, though, and they will be able to attack with that newly summoned Jinzo. It's a Spear Cretin, though, so we'll be able to get back a Magician of Faith here. So Magician of Faith will hit the field, and then we can potentially get back a Raigeki later. They're going to pass back to us. We're going to set a Hero Shadow Scout, pass back to them. We don't want to flip the Magician of Faith now, as if they do have a way to kill us here, then we don't have a Karibo in hand to actually deal with it. So they're going to set another attack into our set. It is Hero, so that will mill 3 very powerful spells. That was very, very good for us. So we've got another Morphing Jar in hand, and that's kind of rough. We don't want to draw all three, especially given that they've got so low resources that Morphing Jar could honestly benefit them more than it does us. But they're going to attack into our set here. It is heroes, so they'll send 3. And another 3 incredibly powerful spells. Those have been the best Hero Shadow Scouts I think I've ever seen. They're going to pass back to us. We draw Imperial Order, which isn't really useful here. So we're going to think about this for quite a bit. We're actually going to set this Morphing Jar, set an Imperial Order, pass back to them. A bit risky here, as this will let them draw something pretty good, probably. But given all the powerful spells in the grave, I think that we're okay giving them a bit more cards, and we just want to lower their deck count, as they are only at 18 cards, so we could potentially win the game just through deck out if we just draw enough monsters to stall for a bit here. So they're going to bring out a Mechanical Chaser, and that's fine by us. They're going to attack into our set here. It is a Magician of Faith, so we will grab back a Raigeki, but unfortunately, they did attack in the correct order. They attack now into a Morphing Jar, and we will lose that Raigeki. So they'll be able to draw 5, we'll be able to draw 5, but these are pretty good ones, so we're okay with that. They Forceful, though, so they will be able to send back this card destruction here. Quite unfortunate, and now we're in a pretty dire situation. Karibo's a good draw, though. That will protect us a little bit here. But we're just going to set a Hero Shadow Scout, just try and deck them out even further. They're going to fire a Mystical Space Typhoon in the end phase. It's just a giant Trunade that we didn't want to activate while they had a Call of the Haunted on field. If we had the card destruction in hand, then maybe we would have wanted to use it, but unfortunately that was the best card that they could have taken there. So they're going to attack in with the Jinzo, and they will mill 3. I misclicked, I accidentally clicked on their monster. But they will just mill 3 here. And they do lose an Omen of Crossout, which is very good. But that Call of the Haunted is a little bit worrying. They're going to attack in for 1850 with that Mechanical Chaser. Attack in for another 1850, but we do have a Karibo for that. They're going to set 1 pass back to us. And we draw Dark Hole, which is honestly the best thing we could have drawn here. That's going to destroy all their monsters. We'll set 1 pass back to them. Maybe we should have fired a Trunade, but the issue with firing Trunade here is that if they chain the Call of the Haunted that they've got, then they can bring back Jinzo, and Jinzo will actually stick on field after that. So I thought it was better not to chain the Trunade, to fire the Trunade, that is. They're going to attack into our set with this Mechanical Chaser. It's a Manier, so that will pop that, but we do know about that Call of the Haunted they've got there. So that will bring back the Jinzo, and that will be the end of the game. So, you know, maybe we could have played this game 3 differently. If we didn't set what we did when we did, then maybe we could have potentially still had the Morphing Jar number 2s online, or the Cyber Jars online, to potentially deck them out even further, as we did get them down to just 8 cards in deck, you know, even losing our most powerful tools. So the deck does still have legs, even when the opponent sided into anti-mill hate. It's just a lot harder to actually achieve its win condition. But I hope that these games showed you how powerful this sort of empty jar deck can be. You know, I think that Machine OTK is slightly better since there is such targeted hate towards empty jar, but I do think empty jar is good enough that it deserves sort of the title as, you know, one of the top decks in the format. And I think its existence makes the format not tier 0. But what do you all think? Do you think that I'm overestimating the importance of empty jar, or do you think that I built the deck wrong and the deck can actually be a lot better if I just made some minor changes? Let me know down in the comments below. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.